Welcome back to Powered by Instinct. I'm Amy Bruske, and today we have a very special guest with us, Mary Martin. This is one of Kolbe Corp's longest serving certified consultants. Mary was actually certified in 1990, and she was the first recipient of our Kolbe Professional Award in 2013. She also is one of the only people who has ever received our top honor, which is the Kathy Kolbe Founders Award that Kathy Kolbe gives to our consultants, and she received that in 2021. She is the author of Come Home Alive, and we're going to talk about this book today, which is such a fabulous example of resilience in using Kolbe in your personal life when you are facing adversity. So, Mary Martin, welcome to Powered by Instinct.
Thank you, Amy. It's so great to see you from Michigan all the way to Phoenix.
Yeah, absolutely. The magic of doing these podcasts. So great to see you. Everyone, Mary's MO is a 4294. Mine again is a 3583. So we're going to see how that plays out here in a minute in her personal life and professional life. But Mary, one of the reasons I really want to have you on is you're such a great example of living the Kolbe mission of empowering people to use their striving instincts to change their lives. And today I'm hoping to cover a few topics. And those of you that know Mary, there's a lot I think you don't necessarily know about her. So I want to start about why consulting. How do you build a consulting practice that's successful? Why did you make that transition? And then, of course, why Kolbe and all of that? But some of what you have found are your best practices and some of your winning decisions as far as how you spend your time with your clients and how you get clients. But I also want to spend some time on how Kolbe can guide you during some of the biggest struggles in life, because what I just really admire about you is how you've used Kolbe in your personal life. By the way, some of you might not know, Mary's a marathon runner. That's one of the things I admire about you the most, all the marathons you run and just what tenacity that takes to do that. But how you've used your unique strengths in some of the things that you wanted to do, like running the marathon. And then, of course, facing adversity in your personal life as well. So let's just start with a little bit about you. How did you get started in consulting? You made the transition to being a consultant. Tell us why you made that decision.
Well, I was working for a communications consulting company in Grand Rapids in the late 80s, and I read about the Kolbe Cognitive Index in the Wall Street Journal in 1990, February of 1990, actually it was. And so then I came to certification in November of 1990. And I was working with a lot of clients in Grand Rapids doing stand-up communication skill training and some team building training. But the article in the Wall Street Journal back then, which was really, I think, the coup d'etat for Kolbe, getting out into the open beyond the Phoenix Suns and things like that at that time. And I was just caught up hook, line, and sinker. I came out to certification in November. I came home and I talked to my husband and I said, I need to quit my job. I want to start my own company with this as the foundation. And 2 to 3 months later, it all started to unfold.
Wow. Okay. So you made a huge commitment. You just said, I'm going to build a business around this. How did you get business in the early days? Like, how did you get clients and get the word out about what you do?
Probably the relationship with the Chamber of Commerce. I was really involved with a number of committees at the Chamber, knew a number of business leaders. I guess one of my really first clients was a superintendent of a school system. And he ended up having virtually the same MO that I had. And it was so enlightening to him. He said, people just do not believe that superintendents operate this way. And it was very enlightening. I was able to work with he called it the A team. It was their cabinet and also all of the principals, all of the, I would say, the key program people at each of the school districts. We were able to work with probably about 30 or 35 of those. That was a real eye opener. And I guess the next part for me, I say I cut my teeth on working with project teams at Johnson Controls. And we are right in the heart of Tier 1 automotive. And I had a great relationship with the people, the senior leader of people. And we started talking about how Kolbe could really, really affect their teams. And one of the key people was so taken with it, he called it the Kolbe way. And so he said, we are going to make all of our teams up based upon the Kolbe way. And they were able to identify best project managers, program managers, finance and account managers based upon Kolbe numbers. And that is really where I enjoyed looking at Kolbe from a forecasting perspective, able to go in, look at team dynamics, and say, this team has a high likelihood of success. And then this team, we might need to readjust and figure out a new program manager. There, one team, we actually did that. One team, we had a quick start as a program manager, and the program was getting off track. And the leader was courageous enough to bring in a follow through program manager to help get that program back on track. I had another leader that actually stopped a training right in the middle of the day and said, this team is done. We
Like,
we
dissolve the team from
Like,
that point?
dissolve the team right
Oh
there and
my.
then, because we are comprised of people that are never going to delight our customer. We are never going to meet our customers' needs. And you're not out of a job, but we're just going to put this team on sabbatical, and I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what other people we need to add to the team. He was
Okay,
very kind in it, but it took me a bit off guard.
that is fascinating. So there a couple of things I want to mention that stick out to me. First is you're talking about going to work in a school system and in major corporate. And those are two of the hardest things to do. And you've done them really well. I mean, a big part of your career has been working with large corporate clients. And as you said, you've had kind of a specialty, especially in automotive. But I think people are scared of that possibility that by knowing Colby results, somehow people will lose a spot on a project team or those kinds of things. Tell us your thoughts on that, because as you're saying, he was kind, nobody lost their job, but that opportunity to affect a difference and to get a greater outcome with Colby is so powerful, but it does mean sometimes that there's going to be hard decisions to make.
Right. I think one of the things that was so, I'll use your word, powerful, is that the team could already see the predictability of what this was showing them. The team could understand, yes, for example, this team that they blew up they didn't have enough fact finders on their team. So they had very few initiating fact finders, and they were working with a client that was extremely data driven. And so they'd come in with essential facts, or they'd want to hop to the bottom line, and that was just not going to meet that customer's needs. And again, I just felt like the leader was so courageous by being able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times we'll say, if you can just focus on the end result, then we can figure out how we're going to get there with the right combination of people and hopefully with everyone free to be themselves. Because the most miserable thing I've ever experienced is being on a project team where you're working against your grain the whole time, too. So I think if everyone can understand how that's better for everyone, that
I
helps.
think one of the very first teams that I worked with, it was comprised of three main people: a program manager, an account manager, and a finance manager. And so those were it was kind of like a triumvirate of that team. And they really led the work of the team. And they could see that team thriving. And so I think that was the real beginning that says there's something to this. And this was back in the mid 90s. This would have been back in 94, potentially.
Mhm.
And there's something to this at this point in time. Kobe you were way ahead of all these other kind of strength based things in terms of practicality and
Mhm.
application. And that really has been the reason why this has been so important to me in my life, and that I have been working with this tool for close to 33 years.
Right. And that's how do you think your own Colby strengths affected you when in your career overall, but certainly back then when you were starting?
Well, I'm a 4294. I think the eye opening thing is to understand where your resistance is, where you prevent problems. I became very aware that I was somebody that could juggle many projects at one time. I was very aware of that. But I also was aware that I was going to have to work very hard at pulling an overall comprehensive plan together. I
Mhm.
think one of my first big comprehensive projects was working with a person who was a one in follow through.
Yeah.
And I have used Colby to really understand, how am I going to go in and frame this approach with this leader? Where the most important thing I think a client wants from someone like us is a partnership where we're able to cover areas where they don't cover. Now, I was a one man show at that point in time. I didn't have any follow through talent on my team, but I made an effort to come in with a comprehensive plan. And I think those are some things that, as you're thinking about getting into this business, having this advantage of knowing how a client operates is phenomenal in terms of how you're going to approach them.
That's right. So even just knowing how to approach them, how to give them their information, how to help them. I do think that leaders so uniquely need us. I mean, I don't think people talk enough about the pain that leaders are in. It's lonely. Everybody's watching you. If you're going to do something bold, like you said, this one leader did, where he's changing the makeup of the group, it better work. So I hope that we do give them this piece of the puzzle that's missing, where they have information to help them make those decisions and be more confident about getting those things done. So, okay, let's talk about why Kolbe. So, you have stuck this out now, nearly 30 years. Why has this worked over time? So, I understand why you got into it at the beginning, but why Kolbe all this time then?
Because I just think the approach of Colby, where it's measuring what I call your striving energy.
Mhm.
And I use this with teams all the time. There is no currency that has greater value than that of personal energy. And now we have a tool that helps us understand what our personal energy is. No matter what your number is on a scale of 1 to 10, it is positive, powerful personal energy. And you have this, I guess you have this treasure trove. You have this box of gold, this pot at the end of the rainbow, that you really understand this level of energy that you have. And in some cases where you're going to run out of it, and maybe how do you end up switching into another action mode in order to accomplish your work? So there will be many times when I have to switch into quick start and race the clock in order to bring closure to 3 or 4 projects. And
Right.
so I will just immediately say, I'm in a race the clock mode, and I move into that. I think Colby, the language, the vocabulary, when I first got into this back in 1990, I spent one full weekend holed up in my um, in my den listening to all of the cassette tapes for
Mhm.
all the different 17 natural advantages.
Right.
And in listening to those, I wrote everything down that Kathy said. And then I created kind of a document out of that. And it was the beginning foundation of being able to personalize the interpretations and maybe
Mhm.
make the tool come alive for people.
Mhm.
But I think you've said this so often, it's practical, it's predictive, and it's prescriptive. And I just think it's the easiest tool when it comes to a strengths based tool to use, because if you can count to 10 and add and subtract, you you pretty much got it.
You can figure it out. Right. The
Mhm.
continuums are so straightforward and simple. And then the solutions are not as simple, right? Because that's why we feel so strongly about having experts who are consultants like you, because applying that in ways where you're really making a difference beyond the individual interpretation requires expertise that we can't do without someone like you. Now, I know that you also use some other tools and assessments. Can you talk about how have you incorporated those into your practice?
I really appreciate we do a lot of work in faith-based and nonprofit work. So I really appreciate what I call our spiritual gifts. I think those are very important for people to understand within the context of others. We've also used Strengths Finder. I think Strengths Finder gives you your, I guess, strength themes, but Colby helps you understand how to put the themes into practice. So,
Mhm.
for example, one of my themes is responsibility. And I can be responsible for a lot of things, but understanding how Colby puts that into practice as a to and follow through, I have to be very careful about what I decide that I'm going to take on. I can't be responsible for everything.
Right.
And one of my themes is ideation. So I have lots of ideas going on, but because again of my to and follow through, I say I have more ideas than I can organize.
Right.
And it just gives me that energy of, okay, should I be organizing this one or should I not? And I think that the more sometimes just being able to see things in context can be
Mhm.
really, really helpful.
Mhm. The responsibility example that you just gave, I think, is such a great one because what we know about the affect or your personality type, so StrengthsFinder's great. I mean, know a lot of people who use that. That's going to tell you what you are driven to do, right? What motivates you? What do you care about enough to take action on? So when we know someone's four Colby numbers, we can't predict what they will choose to take action on. But if you are going to give it your mental energy, we know how you will most naturally get it done. So I love the responsibility example because as you're saying, you are driven to take responsibility on. And if you're going to commit to something, you're going to take that very
Yeah.
seriously that you owe a result back to someone or that kind of thing. But the magic in what you're saying is if we do a good job in coaching people around that, I could see how someone who's a 2 and follow through taking on some project, or let's say you volunteer at your church. You were just saying as faith-based, you might say, I really love my church. I'm committed to it. I'm going to take on a project. And now all of a sudden you're taking on a project that requires 7, 8, 9 level and follow through kind of stuff. But with your level of responsibility, boy, are you going to finish this up? And now you've depleted your energy. So if we can coach people to understand what are they driven to do in the affect, but then only marry that really well with Colby before you decide what to take action on. That's a great example.
I have another one with my 9 and quick start. There will be many times people will ask me to join a board where they're in the middle of nothing. I call
Right.
it, we have
Maintenance.
lots of potential, but we
Right.
really don't know where we're heading. And so to one board, I said I'd not be afraid to join the board at all. In fact, I'd love to kind of open the Pandora's box, but don't ask me to recruit other board members. That does not fall in my wheelhouse as a 2 and follow through. So I think, first of all, the power for individuals comes with themselves. And as consultants, just knowing more about yourself, I think that helps you then take on projects that you can really make an impact. Another consultant said to me years ago, and I have used this as well, is when there's an organization that has a need and they have a readiness and they have a champion, those three things come together, it's going to be kind of
Uh,
lights, magic, in action. And so
that's
one of
right.
the things we've done over the years is to try to create what I call Colby champions inside of organizations. And I'm even fondly known as the mother of Colby in West Michigan.
That is true. There is no doubt. I love that. That's the perfect title for you because I could probably walk into any business in somewhere in Michigan and people would know about Colby out of a room full of people. You have done so much to spread the word. How do you, first of all, you use the phrase, I love that you said there's, I'm going to paraphrase here, but no greater currency
See,
than your personal energy.
right.
Those kinds of descriptions really get to people. Is there anything else that you use to introduce Colby to people that you see really makes a difference, where they get it, they get the power of it, or they take action on it? Because I know we've got a lot of people who are fans of Colby, but they don't know what is the elevator pitch,
Yeah.
or what do you throw out there that makes the biggest difference for someone to want to do more?
I use the word channel and harness. How are we able to channel and harness the strengths that we have sitting around the room? That would be a terminology that I use quite a bit. I also use, when you know your own strengths, you then have confidence to help your team members understand their own greatness.
Mhm.
So how do we do that more? So those would be, I would think, some few examples that I can think of off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, that really hits a leader's needs for sure, right? So, are there any misperceptions that you see about Colby that come up quite a bit? And I think I used to see this a lot more when I was first with the company. I think people are so much more open now just to strengths-based leadership. So maybe it's just become easier, but are there any misperceptions that you still see out there?
I think you're right in saying that. I did have a man one time who thought he should be a 10 in everything. And
Mhm.
he became quite belligerent that he was going to retake this and he was going to become a 10 because that was what he was striving for. And so
Right.
you and I can probably understand what his MO is. He's a 9 in fact finder. And that was probably one of the first ones. What Chris and I, my husband, used to be in business with us, and we were together on that engagement. And Chris felt like he was attacking me. And I have learned more, I think, to be open to really help people express these opinions. I think it used to be maybe in the 90s where people felt like you were putting them in a box with this. I would say two things that I tell people right away: there's no can't to your Kolbe MO. There's no can't to your Kolbe results.
Right.
And it's what you need. It is a necessity.
Mhm.
And I think when you start with those two things, people see their results and all of a sudden they recognize, yeah, that is a necessity. I just hired a new assistant. She's a 7444 and she has graduated from law school but never went into practicing law. And she got her results. And she said to me the other day, I wonder if I had known this earlier, if I might have been able to make that work.
Mhm.
And I think that is the profound thing. How do we get to people earlier? And that's
Yeah,
why I think it's so important for young people to understand this. My two children were able to understand this in high school. And it's made all the difference for them in terms of the career pathing that they have chosen.
that's right. Oh my gosh, that's so powerful. We talk to people in their 50s and 60s and say, if I would have known this earlier in my life, would I have made different choices? And so, I'm so glad that she knows it now. But yeah, that is why the mission is so important and all of that. Okay, kind of to wrap up a little bit about using it in the workplace, one of the things that I have seen you do better than any other consultant is making sure that people use the full scope and the power of Colby. So I know your clients use not just A's. And just as a reminder for everyone, your A is going to help you discover your strengths if free to be yourself. So that is that indicator. But we also have a Colby B, which is how an individual sees their own role and how they need to take action in order to be successful. And then a Colby C, which a leader or anyone else in a position to evaluate the role would complete, saying, here are my expectations of how this person would take action in a role. How have you been able to have this breadth of use with Colby with your clients?
Well, I think the part with the automotive really started right away because the leader wanted to make sure that the people were in the right jobs. So with the A contrast to the B, it was okay, what do I think my job requires in relationship to who I am? Then the leader wanted to understand what level of stress are we putting our key people under. I don't think there's any better tool that helps you understand that than knowing your striving energy and how you're trying to strive because of demands of your job. My own A to B, back when I became certified, I had an 8 in Fact Finder for my basic demands of my job, and I'm a 4. So from an 8 to a 4, that's a gap. And I knew immediately that if I was going to stay in this business, I had to coach myself or understand what I could do in order to minimize that stress or drain that was happening to me in the Fact Finder. And I think when I share this with people, I think it disarms them. It gives them a sense that I'm not wrong, or I'm not the wrong person in this job, or this job isn't wrong for me. It's I can craft my job in certain ways, or we can put people around us and we can figure out the solution that way.
Right, build
And
a
I
team around your strengths so that you don't have to do that. One of the things you said too is sharing examples from your own life, I think are really important when you're working with clients. I know I was in transition the first time I took the
yeah.
Colby A. That was actually a real blessing to me because when I do a transition interpretation, I can share, hey, here's who I am. I've been through this. This is why. But job stress, we need all those examples too. And Mary, you've done a lot to using the team reports too. So getting very tactical, what would you say to consultants who are introducing Colby to organizations? Is there any way that you frame that we're going to do all the pieces? Is it how you do your proposals when you talk to a company? What do you do to make sure they go beyond just the A index?
I think the big thing would be the dynamic. Don't you want to understand your dynamic? It takes two to tango. And there's a dynamic in every organization. I read a quote one time, you don't know who you are until you're in a relationship with someone else. You don't know who you are until you're in a relationship with someone else. And so it's that dynamic. Here in Holland, Michigan, we have Hope College, and they have what's called the Hope College rope pull across a creek, and they do odd years and even years. Well, you're pulling, and whoever loses is going in the drain. And so that's an example of sometimes the tension between the A and the B. You're going in the drink if there's too much dissonance between who you are and how you need to operate. And I have seen this happen over and over again, especially during the pandemic, that people, it's about 18 to 24 months is about as far and as long as they can go operating against their
Mhm.
grain. And so to be able to have those specific examples that you can share with people, I think it makes it come alive. But we work with all of it. I have this thing I call Why Does Colby. And in many cases, I put it on the backside of our agenda with the team because I will be working with the champion who decides they want to do the engagement. And so not every person on the team has been a part of that conversation. And you and I know the more we can get buy-in, the easier it's going to be. So on the backside of an agenda for the session we're going to do, I put on there, well, why does Colby matter? And there's about 10 things on there, and
Uh,
it says if we really go with a deep dive with this, we're going to be able to address all 10 of these with one tool. And now it becomes so much more cost effective for you and for your team.
It is so great that you use the phrase, why does Colby matter? That actually transitions us into what we're going to talk about next because I've been in a meeting before where Kathy Colby was there and David was there, and we kind of had a board of advisors in it. We went through this really interesting exercise where we asked, why does Colby matter? Just give us one example. Every single one of them, there were 7 or 8 people in the room, gave us a personal example. And so I think it's interesting as much we know we can make a big difference in people's work lives and how much they get done and the organizational results. But when you ask people, why does Colby matter? A lot of times it sticks with them more if they've used it personally, either with one of their kids or for their own personal stress. That's how I was when I came into Colby with a job. I liked my job and I had been very successful, but I was completely stressed out and there's no way I would have been able to keep doing that job. And it was the biggest light bulb moment for me about why I wasn't going to work in
Yeah.
corporate America and be happy. But a lot of times it's your most important relationships. And I think what you really show us too is how you've used it when you hit a personal crisis. So I mean, start at just the most basic level because, of course, I'm fascinated by this. I want to know about how many marathons you've run and how your Colby results play into training for something that is such a big, that's a huge goal to even run one marathon. But of course, in your case, you've done many.
I have run 8 marathons. I train for, I like to think the training is way more than the marathon.
Oh, I
So the
bet.
training at some point in time, you're running 100 miles a month,
Right.
and that can get to be brutal. It
How old
uh,
were you when you started?
well, I ran in my early 20s for just a
Hmm.
little bit, and
Hmm.
then I got back into it in my 50s because my son was in Chicago and he ran the Chicago Marathon, and I was so motivated after watching him that I began to start training again. And then we together, the two of us, ran a 5 mile race in Chicago. And then the following year, we together, my son and I, ran the Chicago Marathon in 2006. And so that was the start of my marathoning. I think my marathoning is over, but I still relish those times. I just love to run. It gives me a chance to let my ideas solidify. I'm kind of spiritual, and so I really, really want to have a clear mind and a sound mind. And running is a way for me to be able to clear my brain and kind of
Hmm.
focus on the things that are important to me.
And is there anything particular in your Colby result or his, or I know most people train, they train in a program, right? They use a program that they can accommodate, but
Well,
is there anything specific for you with your MO?
well, I started with a group locally, and I think that was a really good thing to start to begin to put the number of miles that you're going to need. Just running 15 miles all by yourself on a Saturday morning at the very beginning, I think is very, very difficult to do. So I trained with a group for about 3 or 4 years. But then I have this bracelet that my husband Chris gave me that you can etch something in it. And I call it, I'm a running renegade. And that again is my to and follow through, meaning it's very hard for me to stick to one course. I love the ability to head out of my house, turn left, and then decide that I'm going to get at the end of the road and turn right instead of normally turning left. So I call myself a running renegade. And I think probably the 9 in Quick Start, taking on challenges, but I also think my accommodating implementer, the restore talent in me, it's not a pioneering approach, but it is getting close to a pioneering approach. And so I want to be out there scouting out new and different trails.
That's right. That's a great one because a lot of times people say, "Could we apply this to dieting? Could we apply it to exercise?" And of course, you're giving the example of you get bored. I mean, you need to have some kind of adaptability when it comes to even the course that you're taking, and all that. So thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk about your book, Come Home Alive, because let me just well, first of all, tell us about the book, and then I want to read an excerpt because some of the writing is just so fabulous. So tell us how this came to be.
Well, as you know, maybe the audience doesn't, but my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer in 2013. So I say right now, what a blessing. He's had a decade of life. It is just a marvelous thing. And so 2014 was really, I guess I would call it the treatment year. 2015 was really the recovery year, and 2016 was really the rehabilitation year. Throat cancer, I would say, I don't mean to downplay anything else, but throat cancer really affects everything. It's how you breathe, it's how you eat, your digestive system, all of that sort of thing. So we were challenged at the highest level with helping him make it through. And he did. And that's the reason for the book, Come Home Alive. But I just felt called to help others understand that through the power of knowing how to work together. And you know, and I know the heart of the book is all about Kolbe. It's about knowing how to work together to make it through the crisis of cancer. And throughout that whole time, knowing his MO, what he needs. My husband's very different than I am. He's a 7752. He needs a formula. He needs a plan. He needs a playbook. Well, when you're going into cancer, there is no formula. There is no plan. There is no playbook. And so we were just dealing with day to day new events that were happening all the time. And unfamiliarity to Chris is just a little touchy. He can get used to it after a while, but not right at the front. And what was so helpful is knowing what Chris needed. And again, that's really the necessity. So I wanted to focus on what did he need and how could I provide that for him during those 3 years where he was in some cases battling for his life.
So talk about that. Like, how did knowing your Colby result and his make a difference? What do you think you did differently than how most people would proceed and handle it?
I think I probably shared things again and again and again and again. His fact finder, like, what are we going to do? Where are we
Yeah.
going to go? What's this going to look like? I remember one particular situation when he got treated the first time at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. We had never been there before. We'd been to Michigan because our son went to Michigan for school, but we'd never really been to the university hospital. And Chris just looked up at me and he said, I think we better go and spend the night. And I said, I think that's just the really right answer. It may sound trite, but fact finders want to be right. And so
Yeah.
I often tell Chris, you were just really right on that decision.
Right.
And we got there in the afternoon, we got acclimated, we figured out where we needed to go. We did a bunch of things. He
So
had a
he could
future
anticipate already. It sounds like, and he knows himself well. He could anticipate already that getting up that morning and driving was going to be more stressful for him because you
yeah.
don't know about traffic. There's all these unknowns, right? That would affect that more.
Well, driving in Ann Arbor is a crapshoot. I will just say right out loud.
Yeah.
It is very hectic. There's lots of traffic and getting into the parking, any of that sort of thing. So part of it is the A to B again, trying to minimize the stress. What is this going to be like for him? How do we get him operating in his 7752 approach?
Right.
For him, the two and implementer, I think, probably proved to be the biggest thing because he had a feeding tube for 18 months. and someone who, you're a preventing implementer. You don't
Mhm.
like to deal with gadgets and, mechanical things. And here in front of him, he would have I called it a science lab where it's all laid out, your beaker of water, your tube, your syringe, your formula. He had to crush his pills in a pill crusher. All of these things were gadget, and his worst words are some assembly required. And so we had some assembly required
All right.
7 times a day,
Oh my
7
goodness.
times a day. And so that was the point at which I wanted him to know, you do not need to feel inadequate or less than a man. I will help you
Yeah.
because I have that energy and I'm not afraid of gadgets and mechanical things and trying to figure stuff out that need to be put together.
Yeah, it's interesting how the stereotypes play out, right? Like you said, there's a lot in our society, at least, it seems like we expect all the men to do the hands-on dealing with the gadgets and the work and the implementer kind of stuff. And the women should be doing the initiating follow through, planning for the family and all of that. So, but to be able to take that off of his, hands and say, hey, let me help you with this, I think is just fabulous. So tell me about use with doctors. Did
Well,
any doctors did you share this knowledge with any of them?
well, our his primary care physician, we have worked with at practice.
Mhm.
And so his primary care physician immediately knew how he worked. But we did not do Colby with any of the others. That it didn't. It just never ever. It never presented itself.
Right, right.
But
So
his
and
primary care physician did know how he operates. He
mhm,
really supported me very strongly in those very tough, I guess, early days where Chris
that
lost 50 pounds.
yes, oh my goodness, that's amazing. So let me read something from the book really quickly because I think this is interesting. You were talking about Colby in this, and you said it was natural to apply these principles directly to our health crisis to cut out the waste and help Chris carry only what was essential to him. And it just reminds me so much, even my father had a stroke 5 years ago, and I became his power of attorney and just went to all of the doctor's appointments and kept the notes. So everyone, I'm a 3 in fact finder, and having to keep track of 7 different doctors, all of the notes, all of those things. I remember thinking, "Man, if there was ever a time that my mental energy is gonna get drained, this is it. This is a complete drain on my mental energy." And so when you say being able to cut out and keep what you absolutely need to do, I think not only is that important for the individual patient, but also for the caregiver, as well. Tell me about how just managing your mental energy and how the 2 of you handled that, but especially you.
Well, those words came from Lou Kosiski, who I used kind of he climbed Mount Everest, and he talked a bit about what endurance athletes do. And what you have to do is you have to trim it out. You have to only carry what you need. And
Mhm.
when I read those words years ago, they came back to me during Chris's treatment. And I thought, that's a perfect illustration for someone like Chris who needs to prevent in all of these physical gadgets, mechanical things. I mean, fast forward to he no longer can speak and he has to
Mhm.
use a whiteboard now to write his words out. Well, he forgets his whiteboard because he doesn't want to carry it.
Mhm.
It just keeps playing out again and
Over
again
and
and
over.
again and again. And so for
Yeah.
me, because I know that, I might say, do you have your whiteboard with you? It's just a
Yeah.
little tiny reminder because we all have these little glitches that are part of who we are. So I think for me, it was the 9 and quick start that said, okay, I'm in this experiment. I'm in this challenge, no matter what it is, no matter what we're going to do. And we had days that were very challenging. It's not in the book. They cut the chapter out, but there was a day when I was at a Rotary meeting and I get a text that said, "Come home, there's blood everywhere."
Ugh.
And so from the Rotary meeting to coming home, what am I going to be up against? And can he get in the car? Can he drive to the emergency room? What can we do? I think all of these are things that initiating quick starts are not too afraid to tackle. And now if you're in a situation where no one in your household is willing to operate that way or does that naturally, I really think it puts a huge strain on a
Mhm.
couple, a huge strain on the person who's trying to put their energy into getting well. And that's
Right.
really what I wanted Chris to be doing.
Right. Well, and I love
Uh,
so, for all of our listeners, it's the ability to anticipate what's going to be stressful. And then when things really, I mean, this is devastating what you guys have been through. It's already going to be stressful no matter what. Even if you have all the help in the world, all of these things, it's so emotionally draining. Cognitively, you're learning things for the first time. You don't have learned behavior to help you with this. And so your instincts really do kick in and just anticipating where there's going to be levels of stress and knowing who should be doing what, whether they're the patient or not. Like you jumped with your accommodating implementer. I love that example. And just for everyone to remember, it's almost like a second job sometimes. So if you're going to take on using your mental energy in this way in your personal life, and everybody, this could be anything, whether you just had a baby or you have an aging parent moving in with you or whatever, there's only so much mental energy that we all have. So the knowledge of that and saying, I'm going to pick and choose how I'm going to use my energy, and I'm going to have to say no to a bunch of stuff because I don't have it to give is critical. It is this self-management that people really have. So I just think it applies so much in so many ways in addition to a health crisis, but boy, the value of having that in a health crisis is huge. I'll read one more kind of summary statement because your words are so beautiful in here. I just really appreciate it. So one paragraph says, Kolbe provides understanding and gives language for the environment each person will need to thrive. The type of communication that will resonate with his or her needs and the best way for that person to handle specific tasks and requirements that this diagnosis may bring. This insight creates a powerful advantage in the face of adversity. And so I really think that, Mary, all of your years of doing this for other people, and then when you were able to do it, what a blessing for you and all of us having that as an example.
Can I
Iris.
share one
Yeah.
thing that Chris's ENT says? He
Yeah.
says, I have no other patient that is alive this long from that same diagnosis. I have no
Wow.
other patient. That is an advantage. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not saying that Kolbe is the answer. I'm not saying any of that. And I write that in the absolutely. But what I am saying is that we have to interface with our environment. And the more we understand how our natural instincts play out in that environment. For example, at the very beginning, I'm a foreign fact finder. I just said to Chris, I will not be Dr. Google. I am not going up and just studying and analyzing and just getting consumed in all of what's out there in the world on the internet. I'm not going to do that. But as we started to learn more, then I could go respond. Now I used my four to respond to what I needed to know.
Right.
Instead of like gathering the world, I was looking at what do I need to edit? What's important today? How do we use this information now? And how can I condense it if I have to?
Right. That's such a fabulous example. And yes, of course, Colby would not be, the main or only reason that Chris is still around, but hopefully it just helped you guys navigate this difficult situation better. But it's really a testament to the both of you and your resilience. And, you can't just give that to someone. So I appreciate that. So as we're wrapping up, let's bring it kind of all back around. I know we have a lot of newly certified consultants listening,
Mhm.
or just business owners or people running a team. What advice would you give to any of these consultants who want to help change the world, or just someone within their own environment?
We've had many, many conversations. You know how connected I am to this tool. I would say to new consultants, learn the vocabulary.
Mhm.
Understand the difference between what Fact Finder is, follow through, quick start, and implementer. Be able to really, really understand the vocabulary. Like I said, I holed myself up in my den for 2 days and just immersed myself into this vocabulary because I think it's so, so rich. The second thing I would say is practice. We see these people who are seen as experts. They've got 10,000 hours. Go in, practice. I think one of the biggest delights was being able to share at my parents' 50th wedding anniversary party every single person's Kolbe result around the table. And we had about 25 family members sitting around the table.
Right.
And that was just a delight. I will not ever forget that situation of being able
Mhm.
to do that with all those family members. So
Yeah.
practice, 10,000 hours. And then I would say another big thing is find your passion. So my passion is in using Kolbe is to really elevate communication between people and to help people understand what others' intent really is. So again, you use the language of act, interact, react, but I like to add another one called overreact. And I think in this world, we overreact and then others can get defensive about that. But if you know their Kolbe and why they may be overreacting, we can frame our emotion, I think, in a little bit different way. One of my biggest fears is that I will not be prepared. So that's my 2 and follow through. And where you have less energy, that's where your stress is going to come through. So I know that I'm going to get stressed or I'm going to be fearful when I'm not prepared. If I know that about other people and they have a reaction that I think is kind of an overreaction, it changes the way that I connect with them. And I'm
Mhm.
trying to, I guess, downplay it or de-escalate that conversation.
Right.
In families, that happens. In the workplace, that happens too. And again, my passion is opening lines of communication in a broken and hurting world. And that's where I see this tool as being so powerful.
I love that. Yep. That is so powerful too, and what you're doing. So thank you for your passion on that. Where can people get more information on your book and about you, Mary, and working with you?
Well, our organization is called Performance Strategies Group. And I can't tell you how many people can't spell strategies. So we shortened it to PSG. PSG. And I am Mari at psgteam.com. That's my email address. Our website is psgteam.com. And you can learn all about the work that we do in with Kolbe. I do some work with couples in marriage. I call it Highlight Your Marriage, with young people in career choices. But we are probably one of the purest Kolbe consultants there are. I,
Uh-huh.
we practice. This is the highest and best that we use. And I think if you're going to start anywhere, you need to start with this tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you've shown that over and over again that by starting with Colby as the foundation and then building on that is a winning combination for a successful practice because really you've been successful all of these years.
The Come Home Alive, you can get it at any online retailer, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can go up to the website, it's comehomealivebook.com, and learn a little bit more about me, about the book. I will just say that I guess in the end, my husband had to battle another stage 4 throat cancer diagnosis. And so I went back and read my own book in order to deal with that second diagnosis. Ralph Waldo Emerson said this: Kathy is success is the freedom to be yourself. He says self-reliant is true freedom. And that I think is what Kolbe gives people is this self-reliance and this confidence.
I love that. So thank you, Mary, so much for your time today and all of your wisdom. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you today and hearing all of your examples of resilience and using Colby successfully for all these years. And as always, for all of you who want more information about Colby, the best place to start using Colby and finding the freedom to be yourself is by taking the Colby A Index at Colby.com. We will see you next time.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Powered by Instinct. This show is brought to you by Kolbe Corp, a company that helps leaders and organizations thrive using the only instinctive strengths assessment on the market. If you enjoyed this episode, then follow Powered by Instinct wherever you get your favorite podcasts, or join us online at Kolbe.com/podcast for all the latest episodes.